Love knows no law and does not count years. Yes, when it comes to love, a person has no control over himself and does things that he would never have done without experiencing such a strong and sometimes dangerous feeling. Anastasia Rakova was born in 2005 on the outskirts of Novosibirsk in the most ordinary family. Her father worked at a local factory, her mother a clerk in a grocery store. The girl for a long time remained the only child in the family, so her parents gave her a lot of time, bringing up, as they believed, a good home girl. But it was not quite so. According to the stories of friends and acquaintances, it was worth Anastasia to be surrounded by peers, as from a pay girl, she turned into a completely different person. Nastya was a very ambitious, I would even say daring girl. She was not yet 13 years old, as she began to show character, stubborn, purposeful, always got her way, did not go for a word in her pocket. But she wasn't rude or unpleasant. On the contrary, with loved ones, she was always friendly. Sweet, says an acquaintance Anastasia. In the late 2000s, when Anastasia entered adolescence, the Rakovs had an addition to the family, because of which the parents began to give the girl less time than usual. Probably the teenage girl was offended that now all the attention and care goes to her younger brother. Partly because of this, partly because of the hormones in her blood, the girl began to look for a boyfriend, and she wanted to meet not with a peer but with someone older. She was not interested in her classmates. She did not even look in their direction. Nastya thought that she had already grown up, and she wanted to communicate only with adult men. She wanted a real relationship, recalls Lera, a friend of Anastasia's. Staying true to her principle, the girl rejected the courtship of schoolboys. But men, for obvious reasons, did not burn desire to start a relationship with a 15-year-old schoolgirl. It so happened that Anastasia simply had no one to choose from. So when one spring evening in 2021, a young man who introduced himself as Roman came up to her and asked for her phone number, she gladly dictated the numbers. At first, Anastasia hid her real age, adding a couple of years to herself, but even when she confessed to the suitor in a lie, 27-year-old Roman was not embarrassed at all, continuing to communicate with the schoolgirl. In fact, the man also had something to hide from his new acquaintance. Narrow Anastasia about his secrets then. At the beginning of the relationship, she would probably run away from him, blazing heels. To begin with, Roman's real name was Kushnud Hamroyev, and he was born in Tajikistan. His family moved to Russia many years ago, so the man spoke without an accent and preferred to keep quiet about his homeland. Only relatives knew his real name and surname. Kushnud was raised by his mother, as his father left the family early. To support the boy and the other children, the woman worked 2 jobs, so they grew up practically on their own. At the age of 13, Kushnud dropped out of school to help his mother provide for the family. The teenager got a job as a loader at a vegetable base, but he was quickly fired for stealing. He found another place where he also did not last long. In the end, his mother got tired of her son, who did not help the family in any way, preferred partying with friends and socializing with the opposite sex. She showed 19-year-old Kushnud the door, so now the young man had to get used to living on his own. He rented a room from an elderly woman and found a new job. For several years, Kushnud lived quite a decent life. The guy even stopped drinking alcohol and began to save up for a car. But in 2018, he again showed his nature. One day, 12-year-old granddaughter Veronica came to visit her grandmother, from whom he still rented a room. Kushnud immediately showed a keen interest in her, offering the girl to get to know her better. Of course, Veronica refused and told her grandmother. In order to avoid a scandal with all the consequences, Kushnud hurriedly moved out to another apartment. Unfortunately, the elderly woman did not go to the police, and her former tenant, feeling impunity, one day caught up with Veronica near the school and again offered her privacy. This time the girl did not become modest and rudely advised Kushnud to go in a distant direction. This did not please the man and he snatched a knife. Fortunately, all this was happening in front of witnesses who scared the criminal away, so everything ended relatively safely for Veronica. The girl was taken to hospital with minor injuries, from where she was discharged 2 days later. However, this was enough to open a criminal case against Kushnud Kamroev. The man was detained and sent to a pre-trial detention center, where he spent about a year due to a protracted trial. In the end, Kushnud was sentenced to a 1.5 years in prison, but was immediately released because he had served that time in the pre-trial detention center. 1 day in the detention center equates to a day and a half in a general security colony. After being released in late 2020, Kushnud rented an apartment with a friend in the same neighborhood of Novosibirsk where the Rakov family lived, and began to lead a relatively quiet life. Sometimes he would stroll around the evening city with his friends. It was in this way that Roman met Anastasia. At first, the couple met secretly from everyone. But by the fall of 2021, when the girl turned 16, they stopped hiding. Moreover, Anastasia brought Kushnud home to introduce the guy to his parents. The father and mother of the schoolgirl, to put it mildly, were surprised by the choice of the daughter. And really, what could a 27-year-old loader do to interest a young, pretty girl, apart from the fact that Anastasia liked older guys? I once asked her, "Why are you dating him?" She said, "I love him, he's cool, he gives me flowers, gifts." I told her that it is strange to meet with such people. But she never listened to anyone, and Hiran clearly fell in love with him without memory, said a friend of Anastasia. The parents of the girl also tried in every possible way to prevent this relationship, but given the unyielding nature of Anastasia, all their attempts failed. In the end, they finally came to terms with the choice of their daughter, and in a sense accepted the man in the family. He often visited the Rakovs, and Anastasia's mother contributed to the fact that Kushnud was taken as a loader in a chain of grocery stores, where the woman was working at the time. I can't say anything bad about him. Quiet, calm, a little lazy, but overall worked well. We even wanted to offer him a new position. Shortly before the events that took place afterwards, Kushnud's immediate supervisor said, "Age aside, the relationship looked normal from the outside." The couple walked around holding hands. Kushnud often gave Anastasia gifts and cared for her in every possible way. Except that in time, this care began to go beyond all limits. The problem was that Kushnud was terribly jealous. He forbade Anastasia to communicate and correspond with other guys, including her classmates. To do this, the man constantly persuaded the girl to drop out of school, saying that she had no use for her. For several months, the girl followed Kushnud's rules. But by the end of 2021, the freedom-loving schoolgirl's patience ran out, and she told the man that she no longer intended to follow his instructions. Kushnud was more than a little angry. A quarrel broke out between the young people, which ended with the man raising his hand on Anastasia. Only after this incident, the girl finally opened her eyes to Roman. Anastasia told about what happened to her parents, and they supported their daughter in her decision to part with Kushnud, except that the man was not going to let the girl go so easily. Kushnud began to literally pursue Anastasia, flooding her with flowers and begging her to give him a second chance. But the girl stood her ground, telling the man again and again, "It's over between us." When Kushnud realized that the tactics did not work, he decided to act in a different way. The man started threatening Anastasia and her relatives, demanding that the girl resume her relationship with him. Otherwise, things would end very badly. He wouldn't let her pass. He was always waiting for her at the school or at the entrance. We had to drive her to school and pick her up. She wouldn't leave the house alone at all. The stress got her in trouble at school. She was doing pretty well in school, though. In 2022, she failed her exams and was put back in school. In the fall, she was supposed to go to 10th grade again. Anastasia's mother said the Rakov family filed a police report 3 times, demanding that law enforcers calm down Anastasia's obsessive boyfriend. But those limited themselves to formal conversations with Kushnud, at which the man assured that such a thing will never happen again. In July 2022, Kushnud somehow found out that Anastasia had started dating someone else. Most likely, he saw the girl walking around with the new guy. But instead of accepting defeat, he decided to punish the schoolgirl. In the evening, July 26th, he took a knife, lurked near the entrance of the house where Anastasia lived, and began to wait. The girl left the house around 9 p.m., looked around and, not noticing her ex-boyfriend, walked briskly toward a store located just 1 block away. When Anastasia was in the middle of the path, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Turning around, the girl saw her ex-boyfriend. The knife in his hand and eyes mad with jealousy did not bode well, so the schoolgirl rushed to escape. Alas, the man was faster. He caught up with her right in the middle of the road. The worst thing is that this nightmarish action took place in front of 2 motorists. It seemed that they could have saved Anastasia, but at the sight of the frightening man, they did not find the courage to protect the girl. For the same reason, no one tried to stop Kushnud after he, having committed a terrible crime, fled into the thick bushes of a nearby park. It all happened very quickly. I got out of the car, of course, but when I realized he was out of his mind and had a knife, I climbed back in. I actually thought he was crazy at the time. What could I do to him? Admitted later one of the witnesses. While medics were saving Anastasia's life, and the police were trying to catch the culprit in the act, Kushnud went to an old acquaintance to help him cross the border, but the latter, hearing from the father of the native what he had done, locked him in his room and immediately called the police. Kushnud Komrov was detained in the early morning of July 27th. By then, Anastasia had alas died. The prosecution had no shortage of evidence against the suspect, especially given the fact that his crime was caught on the DVR camera of one of the drivers. Kushnud did not deny his guilt, saying that he committed the crime out of jealousy. She went out with someone else. That's not the way we do things, Kushnud said in the Soviet district court in Novosibirsk, where the case was heard. The trial in the case of Anastasia Rakova ended in the spring of 2023. According to its results, Kushnud Komrov was sentenced to 15 years and 6 months in a strict regime prison. In addition, the criminal will have to pay moral compensation to the relatives of the victim in the amount of 2.5 million rubles. As for the police officers, who did not pay due attention to the 3 applications from the Rakovs filed before the incident, they were brought to disciplinary responsibility. They were reprimanded.